You stand on a wooden platform in the center of the town square. A crowd has gathered below you. Hundreds of faces staring up. Some are shouting, some are silent, some are crying. You do not want to be here. You prayed last night that someone else would be chosen. You prayed that you would wake up and find out this was all a mistake, but the order came. Your name was called. And now you stand here, a rope in your hands, a hooded man kneeling at your feet. Your hands are shaking. Your stomach is twisting. You have never killed anyone. You are not a violent person. But today you must become one. Because this is your job. You are the executioner. And in a few moments you will have to pull the lever, release the trap door, and watch a man die. The crowd is waiting. The officials are watching. And you know that after today, nothing will ever be the same. You will be marked forever by what you are about to do. This was the terrible reality in Europe and colonial America from the 16th through the 1900s, a time when public execution was considered necessary for justice and social order. Crimes were punished by death. Murderers, thieves, traitors, and sometimes even petty criminals faced the gallows or the block. But someone had to carry out the sentence. Someone had to actually end the life. That job fell to executioners, and it was one of the most dreaded positions in society. No one wanted it. Families prayed their sons would not be chosen. Men begged to be excused from the duty, because being an executioner meant more than just performing an unpleasant task. It meant becoming a social outcast, marked as a killer, avoided and feared by everyone. In many regions, the job was hereditary, passed from father to son, trapping entire families in a cycle of isolation and shame. In others, it was assigned by lottery or forced upon criminals as punishment. Either way, executioners lived as pariahs, doing work society demanded but could never forgive them for performing. His name was Johann. He was 25 years old and lived in a small German principality. He was the son of an executioner, which meant his fate was sealed from birth. His father had been the town executioner for 30 years, and when he became too old and sick to continue, the position automatically passed to Johann. There was no choice, no escape. The law stated that executioner families were bound to the profession. Johann had grown up knowing this day would come, but that did not make it easier. He had tried to live a normal life. He had learned carpentry. He had fallen in love with a woman from a neighboring village. But when his father died, the authorities came to Johann's door. They handed him his father's sword and told him to report for duty. The woman he loved broke off their engagement immediately. No respectable family would allow their daughter to marry an executioner. Johann was alone, trapped, and filled with dread about what he would have to become. Johann's first execution was a man convicted of murder. The condemned prisoner was brought to the scaffold in the town square. Johann stood waiting, dressed in the traditional black hood that concealed his identity. The hood was supposed to protect him, but everyone knew who he was. Everyone in town knew the executioner's son had taken his father's place. Johann's hands shook as he positioned the man and placed the noose around his neck. The prisoner was crying, begging for mercy, praying loudly. Johann tried to block it out. He focused on the mechanics of the job. Check the rope. Ensure the knot is positioned correctly. Wait for the signal. When the magistrate gave the order, Johann pulled the lever. The trap door opened. The man dropped. The rope went taut, and the man's body jerked and swayed as he died slowly by strangulation. It took minutes. Johann stood there, frozen, watching. When it was finally over, he had to cut the body down and hand it to the family for burial. They would not look at him. They spat at his feet and cursed him. Johann went home and vomited until there was nothing left. The job became routine only in the sense that Johann did it repeatedly, but it never became easier. Each execution was different. Some prisoners went quietly, resigned to their fate. Others fought and screamed. Some begged Johann personally to make it quick. Others cursed him as the instrument of their death. Johann had to execute men, women, and sometimes even teenagers convicted of serious crimes. He used the rope, the sword, and occasionally the axe. Each method required skill. A poorly executed beheading could take multiple blows, prolonging the agony. A badly tied noose could lead to slow strangulation instead of a quick death. Johann felt the weight of every mistake. He tried to be precise to minimize suffering, but the responsibility was crushing. He was ending lives, and every face haunted him. The social cost was immediate and total. Johann was forbidden from entering most public spaces. He could not sit in church. He could not join guilds. He could not testify in court as a credible witness because executioners were considered dishonorable. Shopkeepers served him reluctantly. Tavern owners asked him to leave. Children were taught to avoid him. Adults crossed the street when they saw him coming. He lived in a house provided by the town, located far from the center, isolated and alone. His only human contact was during executions and when he received orders. He had no friends, no social life, no chance of marriage. He existed in a permanent state of exile, performing a function society needed but could never accept him for doing. Johann stopped being able to see himself as anything other than the executioner. His identity was consumed by the role. He was no longer Johann the carpenter, no longer the young man who had once dreamed of a family and a normal life. He was the man who killed people, the man everyone feared and hated. He started drinking to numb the isolation and the memories. He stopped caring about his appearance or his health. He just went through the motions of survival. Wake up, wait for the next execution order, perform the task, go home, drink, sleep. Repeat. He became a ghost, barely living, just existing in a fog of guilt and loneliness. Think about this. Imagine being forced into a job that requires you to kill people, not because you want to, but because society has decided someone must do it. Imagine being hated for following orders, for doing exactly what you were legally required to do. Could you carry that burden? And what does it say about a system that creates such positions and then destroys the people who fill them? The dangers were not just psychological. Executioners faced physical threats constantly. Angry crowds sometimes turned violent. If an execution went wrong, if the condemned suffered more than expected, the crowd could riot. Johann was attacked twice by relatives of executed prisoners. Once, a brother of a hanged man waited for Johann outside his home and beat him with a club, breaking his ribs. Another time, a mob surrounded him after a botched beheading and threw stones until he bled from multiple wounds. The authorities did nothing to protect him. In their eyes, violence against the executioner was understandable, even expected. Johann learned to move quickly after executions, to avoid lingering, to always watch for threats. The job also carried a strange legal burden. If the execution was improperly performed, Johann could be charged with murder. There were documented cases of executioners being prosecuted and even executed themselves for failing to carry out a death sentence correctly. Johann lived with that fear constantly. Every time he positioned the rope or raised the sword, he knew that any mistake could mean his own death. The irony was cruel. He was damned if he did the job well and damned if he failed. But here is the darkest truth. Executioner families were sometimes required to perform other degrading tasks as well. They were often assigned to torture prisoners during interrogations, to mutilate criminals as punishment, and to dispose of animal carcasses and human waste. Johann was ordered to torture a suspected thief, applying tools designed to cause extreme pain until the man confessed. Johann followed the orders, but the screams stayed with him. The work was not just killing. It was inflicting suffering in multiple forms, all sanctioned by law, all necessary for the functioning of justice. And Johann absorbed every bit of guilt and trauma that came with it. Now think about this. Execution still happens in parts of the world. Someone still has to pull the lever, administer the injection, carry out the sentence. Do you think those people carry the same burden Johann did? Do they live with the same isolation and guilt? Or have we just found better ways to distance ourselves from the act? Most executioners did not last more than 10 to 15 years before breaking completely. Johann lasted 12 years. By the time he was 37, he was destroyed. He had executed over 80 people. He had watched men, women, and teenagers die by his hand. He had been beaten, cursed, and isolated for over a decade. He drank constantly. He barely ate. He looked 20 years older than his actual age, and then he made a mistake. During a hanging, the rope snapped. The condemned man fell but did not die. He lay on the ground, injured and screaming. Johann had to strangle him manually while the crowd watched in horror. The botched execution sparked outrage. The authorities blamed Johann. He was fined and threatened with prosecution. That night, Johann walked to a river outside town and drowned himself. Johann's body was pulled from the water the next morning. He was buried outside the town cemetery in an unmarked grave. Executioners were not permitted in consecrated ground. The authorities assigned the job to another man, someone chosen by lottery who begged to be excused but was forced to accept. The cycle continued. The town needed an executioner and someone had to do it, no matter the cost to that person's soul. Society needed executioners to enforce the law and maintain order. Every public hanging, every beheading, every execution that served as a deterrent to crime required someone to actually perform the act. Johann did that work. He killed when he was ordered to kill. He followed the law precisely, and society destroyed him for it. He was essential and despised, necessary and unforgivable. He gave 12 years of his life, his sanity, and ultimately his survival to perform a duty no one else wanted. And the reward was isolation, hatred, and a death in despair. The job eventually changed. Public executions became less common. Professional executioners with better training and some degree of anonymity took over. But during Johann's time, these men lived in agony, carrying out sentences that society demanded but could never thank them for performing. Johann was one of thousands across Europe who lived and died this way. Most have no names in history. They were just the men who did what everyone prayed to avoid. Johann is gone now. The scaffold where he worked has been torn down. The river where he ended his life still flows. But the executions he performed served a system that needed someone to be the instrument of death. He absorbed the moral weight so others did not have to. He became the killer so society could maintain its illusion of justice. And no one remembers his name. If you think being an executioner was the worst job people prayed to avoid, there were others. Jobs that required even more from those forced into them. Jobs that destroyed not just individuals but entire bloodlines. And some of those systems still operate today in ways we prefer not to examine too closely.